Hi everyone! I'm trying to squeeze this video between all the snowstorms. One was here several days ago and another is coming soon, maybe tomorrow. I think this video is very important. It's about the rose conversation between two friends, two neighbors. And the conversation is about when to feed your rose in spring during its first blooming time with natural fertilizers. Here is my question, which I received. Please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. The message was from Kirse Aaron, and this viewer said, Olga, when to fertilize for the spring, February or March? My neighbor does it in February. She says organic nutrients take time to break down. What do you do? Well, the first thing is, it's a very interesting question. I would never think about it myself, so that's why I appreciate your questions. They help me to focus on one specific topic, quite an interesting topic. Now, that's true that natural fertilizers, organic fertilizers, do take time to be available to the root system of the plant. And usually the producers of natural fertilizers tell us that it's somewhere from 2 to 6 weeks. So what happens when we put the fertilizer into the soil? Fertilizer is being eaten by the beneficial bacteria of the soil, and they have to process the organic matter, help to break it down, and then only all the nutrients and microelements are available to our beautiful roses and our beautiful plants in the garden. Now, you know what, I like to ask questions. Why 2 to 6? What's the difference between 2 weeks and 6 weeks? You can say that there are different types of natural fertilizers. Of course, there is a huge difference between a liquid fish fertilizer and the granular fertilizer, which decomposes later. But there is also a difference. There is also the reason why there is 2 to 6 weeks. The reason is in our soil. When we look at our soil, and soil is very healthy, the breakdown of natural fertilizer would be much faster. And why is that? And what is this health of the soil? By health of the soil, I mean the number of good beneficial microorganisms and bacteria which are living in your soil. When you try not to use artificial stuff, when you don't put a lot of artificial things in your soil, the life of bacteria and natural microorganisms are big and flourishing in your soil. And logically, when you have a lot of this life present in your soil, they help to break the natural fertilizer so much faster. So here we have this gradation from 2 weeks to 6 weeks. I assume that my soil is healthy. This rose didn't see its artificial fertilizer since it started its life in my garden 11 years ago. I put only natural stuff in the soil, and I assume that this soil is beaming with all sorts of good, diverse microorganisms, which are helping my rose to thrive here. Now, the second part of the question was, do you do in February or March? Now, our viewer didn't tell us where she gardens. I assume that since she said February or March, she gardens somewhere in the colder zones. Since we connect fertilization of roses to the beginning of growth season, and for you who don't know, I garden in coastal Connecticut, just on the borderline between zone 6, 7. And my roses wake up from their dormancy around somewhere in March. Depends on the season again. If we're having very prolonged winter, my roses starts to wake up later. But it all depends on the temperature of the soil, the length of the day, and the presence of humidity in the soil. Why is that? Well, if our soil is warming up, the snow starts to melt down, first beautiful spring rains appearing, the activity in the soil starts to become, all the soil's bacteria are becoming more active, and the activity in the soil intensifies. So if you put your fertilizer in the soil, which is not active yet, there will be no bacteria to break that fertilizer, that natural fertilizer. Of course, some decomposition will happen because the bacteria are present to some low degree. The activity is present, bacterial activity through winter, but not as actively. Bacteria are not eating the fertilizer so actively as if they do it in warm, moist conditions. So if your neighbor, so when you live in colder climate where your roses wake up from dormancy in March, and your neighbor is fertilizing roses in February, I think it's maybe a waste of fertilizer. I don't think she's going to lose the fertilizer. Maybe fertilizer will start deteriorating in the open air and in outside conditions. Usually the producers of natural fertilizers gives a shelf life up to 5 years, several years, but it's in the very very good conditions, shelf life, where temperature is the same and all the packages are closed. So that's another thing, how we keep our fertilizers. I should do a video on that. But when the fertilizer is open, the process of deterioration begins. So I would say that your neighbor who is doing it in February and roses start to wake up from dormancy in March, they will still benefit greatly from fertilizer, since that fertilizer is not being decomposed or not being eaten by the soil microorganisms right away because it's cold outside and soil activity is not very strong at that time. So basically what your neighbor's fertilizer does, it waits in the soil for all the bacteria to start eating it actively and start providing the nutrients to the soil. And you probably feed your rose in March. And if you have a very healthy soil, it means that your rose has plenty of nutrients from the previous year to collect during those times of waking up, where your fertilizer, your natural fertilizer, is not there yet. For example, me. Every fall, when I put this rose to dormancy, I make sure I cover all the area around the root ball of the rose with well-decomposed cow manure. And this cow manure works itself into the soil slowly during the warm and cold days of the winter. And in spring, it's all ready for my rose to start feeding on that natural stuff. And then during pruning time, I add the fertilizer. So if you ask me what do I do, that was the last question, what do? I wait for my roses to start their bud starts to swell and leaves are just ready to come out. That's the time when I do my major spring pruning. I clean everything under the rose, I fertilize it, I cover it with mulch, and my rose is ready to go into beautiful spring. And I decide my rose, I let my rose to decide when the rose wants to be pruned, fertilized, and usually they say that's the best thing to do if you can't rely on buds or you don't know how buds look in spring. The best thing is to find forsythia growing in your neighborhood. My neighbor has forsythia right there, very convenient. I can see it from my window in the kitchen. So when I see forsythia coming into its beautiful yellow blooms in spring, I know it's time to cut my roses. And for me, it's right away the time to fertilize my roses. And again, if your soil is very healthy, this soil didn't see any artificial stuff for 11 years. Bacteria break that fertilizer right away, and in 2 weeks you have it available for your plant. So I hope it solved the problem and I answered your question. Please do let me know in the messages underneath this video. Please do subscribe to my channel, and happy gardening. I will see you next time.